There you are. Is it difficult to be Simon Collins or Nicholas Collins with the? At the beginning, I suppose that having the same last name opens some door to a certain extent, and a lot of pressure, like Nicholas, for example, touring with Genesis, that you and I saw that many times, and now Nicholas is going to be touring with Mike Rutherford and Mac at the Mechanics. Is it difficult to be the son of, or the, being the?
I mean, I don't know. That's a question for them. But from my perspective,
yeah,
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think that, on the one hand, you get things a little easier. People care. It was interesting to see actually like the difference between someone like me or Matt Dorsey, the son of no one. We used to joke like my dad, sang in a barbershop quartet. He's actually in the video that we did for Not Coming Down. He's a doctor. Anyway, so I don't have I have to earn everybody's attention that I get to my music. There's no free ride. Maybe there is a little bit, for the fact that I actually work with, like, secondarily, some of the mojo from Steve Hackett or the Collins through the generations, or some of that stuff. Maybe actually this is my only, benefit, is that people take me seriously because they think, oh, well, if he works with Keith Emerson, he must be good or something, whatever. Maybe, unfortunately. I think unfortunately, because it should just be like, look, did you hear something you liked? Doesn't matter who it is.
That's
you like
right.
it, right?
That's
so
right.
with those guys, the double-edged sword is they get an easy interest from the media, from people. But there's a flip side. There's expectation, there's comparison. There's like, oh, he's not as good as, or there's big shoes to fill. And it's pressure. And so, if it was me and I was given a choice in life, like to be, I would rather be that, have the advantage, and then just take it and run. I would be like, okay, I'm Peter Gabriel's son. Great. I'm going to freaking like work it and be like exactly like what that could potentially be. That's easy for me to say though. Because you never know what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. And so, and especially in a family that's had like multiple divorces and people on tour and this and that, and who knows? I wouldn't blame Simon for wanting to do music as far away from his dad as possible, if that's what he wants to do. And if anything, I'm sort of like, not the bad guy, but the kind of like the one who's like, nah, it's like, well, come on, let's do something really Genesis, and it's like, oh, it's easy for you to say. You don't know anything about all the family politics or any of that stuff. Yeah. And I know what I like, and I know what, no pun intended, and I know,
yeah, pun intended.
And I know what I hear. And what I hear is a great drummer. So Simon is just like a drummer that actually has in his blood. I feel like he has it in his blood, some of the talent of Phil on drums. Now, on vocals, Phil is no one has the talent Phil has. On vocals and melodies and stuff, he stands alone. I've never heard anybody like him in that sense. Maybe Peter Gabriel, but in the sense that he's like Peter Gabriel, but Phil is just Phil. Martin LeVac can actually imitate him the best, but still very, very unique. But Simon can kind of sound like Phil and also like Peter Gabriel if directed and written to do so. But naturally, just a little bit like it, but not that much like it. And it's probably more authentic for him to just do what he does. But for me, I'd be like, no, you got to sing it like Supper's Ready, dude. Like, and like, to me, like, I'd push him in that direction, for better or worse. For better if you're a Genesis fan. For worse, maybe he hates me for it. I don't know. But either way, that's just what I do. It's what I hear. I hear the ability. I hear him as not just Phil Collins' son, because even if he wasn't Phil Collins' son, I would just hear him as a musician, hear the timbre of his voice, and hear what he's capable of doing, and still would push in that direction because that's what I like if it suits the song. I don't do it if it doesn't suit the song, but if you're writing that kind of grandiose thing like Mobius Slip, and you need that ending part, which I wrote most of the end part. I see the starlight, and you have to sing it that way. That's just what it's supposed to. That's what it wants to sound like to me. So but anyway, I see, like, I listen, and I hear what people do, and I'm like, as a producer and as a songwriter, I try to utilize that and be like, get that out of them. And it was great working with them at the time for doing that. I wish we could have done more, but it's not that easy to do that. Actually, it's a miracle. Actually, we did that album, and then I was given that much, as co-producer, and co-wrote every song on the record. I would never be like Waters and say I wrote everything. I didn't, but I wrote a lot of it, and I was able to contribute a lot, and I was able to have a lot of fun creatively with it. That I'm grateful for to that opportunity, but I don't see them ever, like, when we got together again to try to make a second record, it was going to be done very differently. It was like, okay, now we're each going to write an even amount, and we're going to do this. And then that didn't work either. And I had actually suggested, I'm like, why don't we just do it the way we did the first time? And then I'm like, and I'm like, all right, I just have to do my own bands and my own productions. And if I want to do that, I could still be, I'm in the band with the guys from Yes.
Yeah.
I don't write any of it. I don't have to. If they want me to, I will. But I don't even write any. Talk about it, an imbalance. It's kind of like that's, if Billy Sherwood was to pull a Roger Waters and say, I wrote it, it's not untrue. But the thing is I'm okay with that, because I realized the most important thing to me is I just want to make good music that I like, that I could put out in the world, that might have the same effect on other people that music I think is great has on me. And that's it. So whether and I work with willing parties to do it, who, let's say, it's a little easier to get people to be cool with doing what you ask if either A, you pay them, if you hire them, or B, the context of it isn't like supposed to be a real band where there's a balance of power, or a balance of, so, because even in Continuum, which is a band I created, is really like from the onset me with a band name, and me just not always singing it, but me running the show, whatever. And everybody who plays on it knows from the beginning, like, oh yeah, Dave, yeah, it's your thing. Okay, what do you want me to do? And then if they say, okay, I have my thing now, will you play on that? And I'm their bitch, I'll do whatever they want, for their thing. And it kind of works well that way. I do love a real band, but I think a real band is tough to stay together, because there's this kind of like same thing. It's just like, why should I do what you want to do? Why don't you do what I would do? It's like, well, do we want this album to be cohesive, or do we want it to be all over the place? Like Synchronicity is a great album, but the song Mother is just like, there's no way Sting wanted that song on the album, but it's, and
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Of course, I know you were with Alejandro in London. I was there too. I wish I had met you. I saw Genesis. Let's see, here when they play in Washington D.C. Then I flew to Boston, the last 2 gigs in the United States, and then I flew to London to see the last 3 gigs. And I was thinking about the pressure that a kid like Nick, 18, 19 years old, playing in the best band probably of all times, and he's just a baby, and he did a very good job. And of course, his dad was in front of him, and it must have been very difficult for a guy like him, I suppose. the Genesis sounded unbelievable. Like, yeah, it was sad for me to see, Peter Gabriel. I mean, not Peter Gabriel. That Phil sitting on a wheelchair with his cane and so forth. Yeah, it was sad, but besides that, the show was unbelievable, man.
Yeah, and he did a great job.
Yeah.
Both, considering their, situations. Phil being much older and not in the best health, and Nick being, but he's a pro, and he's a solid drummer, and he's fearless. But I've met him and I've talked to him a bunch. Might work with him actually a little bit because he's local here in South Florida. Yeah. And he's solid, great drummer, and did it. I think there's a big thing. I believe in this, which is you reach as a musician and other art things in the arts, or maybe even sports. It probably translates to maybe everything. You reach plateaus, meaning like you think like once you have something under your belt, then it's like, well, that's my foundation now. That's my new standard. So, you graduate to the next level in your own confidence, let alone, let's say, in the industry. Like, for instance, the fact that he did the Genesis tour, for sure, was his audition for Mike and the Mechanics. My brother was like, yeah, he can do it. I saw him do it. He did it. So, and then lots of other gigs that he can get, it's like, well, doesn't matter how old he is, he can do it. And so, but also to yourself. I remember even like, let's say when I played The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway with Kevin, it was not easy. It's one of those things you think like, oh, I love this album, but I got to play with Steve Hackett. So I played on the Genesis Revisited 2 album. I played on Supper's Ready, which is amazing. Another thing that was just incredible. But you gotta love Steve. And we were invited, myself and Francis Dunnery from It Bites, to guest with him in Chicago. And we were going to play on Supper's Ready live with no rehearsal.
Wow. Oh,
and so I'm playing in 9/8 time signature. And although I've listened to it my whole life, it's not like I play in a Genesis tribute band and just know it. I know it, but like I haven't had a chance to really play it. Here I am going to play in front of 1,000 or 2,000 people. And I'm like saying to Francis, I'm like, why do we have to like this music? Why couldn't we be playing the blues or Freebird or, something else? Like, this is hard. I have to go out there in front of all these people and go, da, 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 da. And I made like 1 or 2 little mistakes, but overall I did it. And then Steve Hackett, it was a great experience. And then Steve was walking over to me on stage to say something, the musicians talk to each other on stage. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, it was like slow motion. He's like coming over. He's such a nice guy. I wasn't really that worried, but he came over and he goes, nice job. And then walked away. And I was like, oh God. But anyway, I forgot why I was saying that. But it just was, kind of it was a crazy experience. Why was I saying that?
I don't know. I would be so nervous, man.
Once I did those things, it was kind of like, okay, now I believe that I could go play Supper's Ready with Steve Hackett at a moment's notice. And I can. Like, there was a few times, there was another show, we did a Kevin Gilbert show, without Kevin, like a tribute to Kevin's Shaming of the True. And again, we had 3 days only to learn the whole album. And everybody, not even just me, but like Brian McLeod, this great drummer who's played with Sheryl Crow and Michael Jackson, all these different people. He was just like, it's not enough time. It's not enough time. How are we going to do it? And I'm like, he's nervous. Oh, he played with Tears for Fears. I'm like, but because I had pushed the envelope on these other gigs, I felt like, it wasn't perfect either, but we did it. We did do it. Right. And people loved that show. So same thing with Nick. I think like, you push yourself to do something and you do it, you're now at that level. and you can like do other things, and it's, you know, it's part of your repertoire. It's part of your skill set now, as you know, you've done these things. And again, whether it's other people believing you, or even more so, you believing in yourself.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like now he did it, right? So it's part of his resume. You did
Yeah.
it. You know, you play with Hackett and so on and so forth. So now, like you say before, people will take you more seriously, I suppose, and open more door because what have you done? Well, I'm not just the son of, or I'm not just hanging out with Alan Parsons or the people from Jazz or the people from from other band. Well, I kept playing this track. You can check, like
Yeah.
my background. Like you say before, I already reached a plateau, and I want to take it to the next level and the next level, and you're becoming a better musician. Whether it's Steve Hackett call you, or or the Tears for Fear guys, or Camel guys, or whatever. So.
Even more than, let's say, people being impressed. That's one aspect of it. But like your resume. But I mean, even more, just like, and it doesn't have to be something even famous. It could be, let's say you're in high school, like for instance, my son, he plays trombone, and he conducted a trombone choir. And like, they presented it in front of an audience and everything. Like, once you do that, then he's saying to me he wants to compose. And it's like, so these are building blocks. And
right,
so,
yeah.
But you have to challenge yourself. And that's how I see Nick playing with, as young as he is, playing with Genesis, is kind of like, you know what? There's a lot of people who wouldn't have the guts to play in front of huge audiences with such a big legendary band and do it night after night. And not just guts, but like professionalism, being sharp, on time, reliable, all that stuff. And it's kind of like, I kind of look at it like this. I'm not even a big sports fan. I know you guys love your football, soccer, but like, there's a baseball analogy that I do use. I'm not usually into baseball or anything, but it's very simple. If the ball's over the plate, your job is to knock it out of the park. And if you hesitate, it goes right by and it's a strike.
Right, yeah.
If you sort of do it half-assed, it could be a foul, But if you like seize the moment and you go and just knock it out of the park, that's your job. When you're up to bat and you have that opportunity. So that's exactly what he did. He knocked it out of the park. That's and right. So for that, he pulled it off.
Yeah, I interviewed him like with his band 5 weeks ago, and I asked him. I didn't have the rapport with him because I don't know him personally, and he say I was there. They hired me to be a drummer, to do my job. Independent of Genesis being one of the best bands of all, and I did the job. I was hired to be the drummer, and I did, and we rehearsed. He told me for two months before that, and then I learned the music. I knew the music for my dad and blah blah blah, and he was so cool. I don't know how some people can be so cool, and I would be so nervous. Never mind that I don't know any music.
You think you'd be nervous, but
yeah.
Also, I think you wouldn't be nervous if you did certain things already.
Right, yeah.
That you got used to it. I remember one of the greatest things that I did, and other people did in my high school, was perform in front of an audience and get it out of your system. All the nerves and being scared and stuff, like get used to just playing in front of an audience. Some people say they still get nervous. I don't really get nervous, because I'm just kind of like, my perspective is different in the sense that for me, I mean, for him, let's say he's saying, I've got a job to do and I do it. And, that's very professional. I wouldn't say I'm that professional per se, but my approach is more to do with the love of the music and the connection between me, the music, and the audience. And there's a zone, and I want to get into that zone. And if you get out of that zone and you start becoming self-aware and all that stuff, you could totally train wreck the whole thing, like just an embarrassing thing or whatever. Even if you make a mistake, though, there's also like comedy and things, other things to like reel it back in. And as long as you're in the zone. And I think that's the most important thing to me, is just kind of like, just connecting in that way. And fortunately, the people I play with, like Fernando Perdomo, and Durga McBroom from Pink Floyd, and Nick DiVirgilio and Matt Dorsey on bass, or Billy Sherwood from Yes on bass, they all kind of feel that same way, especially Fernando, though, because Fernando gets just lost in the zone. And whatever happens is very live, very authentic, very special, unique to that moment. But I never feel like when I'm playing with him that it's just another day at the office, just you're going through the motions and playing the part or whatever. And that's what I love about doing my own music and being the musical director, because I can allow that to happen. I don't put a bunch of sheet music in front of everybody and go, it needs to be exactly like this every night. It's like, no, man, there's, feel it. You need to feel it every night. You need to get in the zone every night. You need to, and respect the song. Can't just go off and do whatever. It's not an open canvas, but it's just loose enough to be alive in the moment. That's what I like about it. But that's when it's your gig. When you're playing someone else's gig. I remember playing one gig one time. I won't say who the artist is. He's a semi-big artist. And I thought I could kind of do my interpretation of the parts. It thought wrong. And he wanted it exact. And I didn't learn it exact. And it was embarrassing. It was really kind of, I learned it was a good lesson, but it was an embarrassing lesson because it was in front of an audience. He even like called me out in front of the audience. Dave doesn't really know the parts. I'm like, fuck. But, but okay, you know what? If it's not your gig, you have to do, when it's not your gig, what you need to do, it's a little harder. You have to learn the parts exact, and then feel or ask if there's room to change it. And if there isn't, you revert back to the exact parts. I'm sure it's the same, must have been the same. Those would be good questions as far as like how much freedom Nick had to do fills or do things differently than what was like written to the songs. I would say, I had to guess, probably 80, maybe like 90% of it was like the same every night. And maybe there's that 10% of just like, oh, you could put a fill here, you could do a little something different there or whatever. But
man, those Genesis shows were amazing, man. I remember going to the hotel. I couldn't fall asleep because I knew that were the last 3 shows of Genesis, and the hotel, I couldn't fall asleep. And then about 2 a.m. in the morning, and I knew I did some Saturday. I knew that I was going there to the O2 to see them again, and amazing, man. Well, I'm very happy, fortunate to have been able to do that kind of stuff. Feel free to elaborate how you end up meeting Keith Emerson, because he is an important part of your life, I think, meeting him.
Well, I just, we were playing a gig in Santa Monica with Kevin Gilbert, and it was just a little bar. And Keith lived in Santa Monica. I didn't know that. And so I pulled up my truck, and Kevin was talking to Keith Emerson in the front. Kevin didn't tell me shit. He didn't tell me that Keith was going or anything like that. So I pull up, and Kevin goes over to my car, and I say to him, like, is that Keith Emerson? He's like, yeah. You want to meet him? I'm like, of course I want to meet him. Like, I said, what's he doing here? He said, he came to see us. I'm like, here? You invited him here to this gig? It's this little gig? And he's like, yeah, he lives down the street. So he came over, introduced me to Keith, and Keith offered to help move my keyboards with me into the gig. And then he said, would it be okay if I could be your roadie this evening? And I just thought, that's it. He's so cool. And we became friends. And over the years, just helped each other out with some different things. And, you know, obviously very, very sad when I got the news that he died. And, you know, but there was one thing that I'll never forget that was kind of special, I guess. It's weird, but it was, I feel lucky. The day David Brubeck died, Dave Brubeck, Keith was a huge fan. That was one of his heroes. Somehow I ended up talking to Keith that day. I don't know if he called me or I called him or something. It's not like we talked all the time, but, you know, we would talk and we would go out to dinner with his girlfriend, Mari. And, but we were on the phone and he was crying and he was saying, you know, because this was one of his heroes and he was telling me stories and this and that. And I told him, I said, well, this is how we think of you. Like, this is how we see you. How you see Dave Brubeck is how we see you. And it was almost like it didn't occur to him. Like, it finally clicked. It's like, oh, you guys see me how I see Brubeck? Like, yeah. You know, like, we care. We love you. You know, and so it was just very, you know, especially, I mean, it was just a nice moment at the time. But later, you know, when he was, you know, when he was gone, I kind of felt like, well, at least we got to tell him in a certain way how important what he meant to us and that we love him. You know, I mean, I'm sure there have been other instances where people say it. I'm sure people say it all the time, but this was a very genuine, human, down to earth, like, perspective moment where it wasn't just people going, "You're the best, we love you," blah, blah, blah. It was like, you know, making the connection to him, to Brubeck, us to him. It was just like, especially keyboard players, you know, it was like we're going to be crying when you're gone. Of course, you know, the way he left too soon made it that much more, you know, and same thing with Kevin Gilbert, way too soon. Just that much more tragic. But either way, whether they, you know, they're gone, and yet at the same time, though, I mean, and it's sad, but at the same time, I was just thinking this the other day because I was listening to Pat Metheny Group. I was listening to actually Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays, As Falls Wichita Falls, or As Wichita Falls.
Oh man, that's an unbelievable. That's one of my top 10. In my 10,000 record, it's the top 10. It's unbelievable.
Beautiful album.
Yeah.
And listening to this part with Lyle Mays being Lyle Mays, and thinking to myself, what a gift to the world he left us with this music. Like, in his window of time existing,
yeah,
you know, he made these things, his solo albums with Pat Metheny, and we could still listen to it even when he's gone. Thank you. Like, you know what I mean? I was thinking, like, same thing with Kevin, same thing with Keith. And that's when I sort of thought about what I do. And I thought, you know, it's a worthwhile thing to do, to create art, music, put it out there in the world. And then even when you're gone, people can still enjoy it.
Absolutely. You know that Lyle Mays was, well, yeah, he passed away. So was a very, very smart guy. And I mean very, very smart guy, like gifted type. Forget about the music. Forget about he played the keyboards and, you know, he was pandemic. He was a very gifted individual.
Yeah.
I have seen many interviews. He knew how to code programmer, how to do magic trick, create some inventions. I mean, the guy was gifted. That's the word, gifted. No, smart, gifted. It so happened that, you know, he was a musician and hung out with Pandethini for many years doing great music, but he was unbelievable. So, well,
yeah.
You know, so let's talk about, feel free to talk about a little bit about your company, Sonic Reality, how you started, what you do, who has been your customer, your clients, and so on.
Well, Sonic Reality, I started in the mid-90s because I was I had all these keyboards, and then I couldn't fit them all, so I would have to sell them off sometimes to, you know, help pay rent or whatever in LA. And but I would sample them. I would record the sound of them and have that sound forever. And then I started doing that for other artists and bands, like from Crowded House to Madonna, Smashing Pumpkins, especially for their tours. Because let's say Smashing Pumpkins and Crowded House wanted to use the sound of Chamberlins and Mellotrons on tour, or Tom Waits. I did it for Tom Waits. But they didn't want to take those actual instruments on tour. And this was before they had digital versions like they have now. So early on, I did that for them. So when CD-ROMs, there was a company called Great Sounds. And also there were companies like Roland and Alesis that were doing these expansion cards for their keyboards with vintage sounds and stuff. So I created sounds for them, for Alesis and Roland, and for this company, Great Sounds, that did floppy disks. But as soon as it came out with CD-ROMs, I was like, this piano that I sampled for Madonna, or this Chamberlain, like, I own these samples, and I could put them on CD-ROMs and sell them. So there was a company called Ilio, that's a distributor, and I worked with them to put out, I think my first library was called Vintage Time Traveler, or maybe the one before that was Classic Rock, Classic Keys of the 60s and 70s. I don't know. But that was my bread and butter. That was my, day job, while I was just pursuing my music at the time, playing with Kevin Gilbert and other things. So I started Sonic Reality then, and then eventually, let's say by the year 2000, I moved back to Florida from LA. And in 2001 or maybe two, I collaborated with a company called IK Multimedia, which is a software company, was a software company in Italy who had a product called Sample Tank. And we created products together like Sampletron, which is a digital mellotron software, Miroslav Philharmonic, which is an orchestra that Tony Banks uses a lot. And Sonic Synth, and all these sample libraries, and various products together. And my brother started running the company in the US, and we partnered up. And just, from there, I mean, when you talk about, because this is over a span of over like 25 years, and then with IK, maybe, over 20 years, the people who use it are a vast number. I mean, let's put it this way. You can't listen to the radio and not hear something that we produced.
Wow.
Stuff like in a day. Because it could be Beyonce, it could be Coldplay, it could be Eminem, 50 Cent. It could be, it's not, but all the Tony Banks and Jeff Downs and John Anderson and all sorts of people, John Paul Jones. I actually had a phone call with John Paul Jones about Mellotrons for them Crooked Vultures tour and helped him out with stuff. So when it comes to those kinds of things, that I've been part of that world since the beginning of it. Software, music, instruments, and effects. So like the cutting edge of that stuff, I've helped shape that world of what people can do in their computer, in a small way, because there's, but I've been part of that and on the edge, cutting edge of that. And I use it myself, and that's been actually one of the driving forces behind, like, for instance, actually, we just released a software recreation of Genesis Studio. So because I'm friends with them and I work with them, and they were closing the studio, I was able exclusively to go in there and with IK Multimedia and capture the sound of it and recreate it in software. So now people can buy the Farm Stone Room. Their studio was called the Farm. And pull it up and put their drum sounds through it. And they get a little bit of that Phil Collins drum sound just from this software. And if I didn't do that, and I didn't have the connections that I have with Genesis and all that stuff, the Farm would be gone and the product would never exist. But it's just like the thing with the Nick Mason and Alan Parsons. I make use of the fact that this is what I do for a living, and that it means so much to all these different music artists, and they love it so much that they are open to doing things and being part of it. Like Neil Peart, we sampled Neil Peart. Who's ever gonna? I mean, he's gone now also, but even back when he was alive, you couldn't just hire Neil Peart to play drums on your song, but we recorded his drums, and you can still use his drum sounds in your song because he was gracious, and one day he let us do that with him. But it's all because of all this other stuff we do. People just like it. The musicians love IK Multimedia and Sonic Reality because these are the tools that allow them to realize their musical visions on a scalable budget too. But like I said, I kind of just think of things from my side. I think of things I'd want. And if I want it, probably other musicians want it. And so any of the products that I'm involved in that I help happen are born out of just being the musician, songwriter, or producer myself and going, it'd be really cool to have the sound, the plate reverb, or the echo chamber at Sunset Sound, or the mastering rig of Gavin Lurston, those kinds of things. It'd be like, this is my wish list, but I can actually help make it happen. And then other people, dude, I'm so glad you did that. Like The Farm, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, so it's almost like a Robin Hood, because it's so, it's like even the Miroslav Orchestra. I bought that out from Miroslav Vitus, who played with Weather Report, and he had this very expensive, the most expensive orchestral library. It was like $4,000 to buy it, the whole thing, or more. And at the time, it would be like $20,000 today. Wow. And he had done it for a while, and he was kind of like, all right, I'm done with this. And so my idea was to buy him out with IK. So we went in on it together, the CEO, and to make it $500 instead of $4,000
at the time. Yeah.
And even now there's even like a $200 version or whatever. But and all of a sudden it was just like, okay, now you can afford a high quality full orchestra. And Tony uses it to mock up his classical albums. So before he does his classical albums, before hiring an orchestra, he'll play the keyboards and he'll use our plugin to get the sound. And then he'll, and then he'll record the real orchestra. And, so actually I got Genesis into plugins to begin with, because at the time I was friends with Nick Davis. It's a whole other story. And I said, do they want anything? Because, I'm happy to give them some things, if they'd want. And this was like early 2000s. And he was like, nah, they're not really using plugins yet. And I'd ask him every year. And then finally in 2004, I think it was, or 5, it's somewhere in there. He said, yeah, they're thinking about using plugins. Like, is it okay if Tony has this and Mike has? I'm like, absolutely. It's my favorite band. Like, whatever you want. And I set them up. And because I helped get them into plugins, they invited me to their studio while Nick was singing, because they were like, oh, this guy's cool. I like this guy. He's a positive force and helping us out or whatever. It's not that they could afford to just go buy him, but it was like they needed somebody to kind of, not handhold, but just kind of be like, here, try this, just trust me, and of course, that was the beginning of this revolution of being able to make music in your computer, which now today everyone does. That's right. But it's like people switching from how they used to do it to like, I don't know can we do it in the computer? Like, yeah, you can do it. You sure? Like, and the computer's getting faster and faster. And it's like, oh yeah, you can do it in the computer. That's how it's done these days.
Yeah, I think the farm was so loud, and because the land there in Surrey is very expensive, and I have seen the console somewhere online for sale, and I think you might know, because I know you were there with Alejandro, but I think the building, the structure is still there.
If it's not demolished already, it will be, because like you said, land is like for really nice homes and stuff. It's a residential area.
That's good.
Also, the building is kind of old and is falling apart a little bit. Like it's not.
No.
So yeah, and it's gutted, you know. So there's no studio anymore.
Yeah.
But like I said, I bought a lot of the equipment. Some friends of mine bought a lot of the equipment. We almost bought that console for a lot less than they're selling it for. These people, it ended up being bought by a band. I won't say who, but there was a friend of theirs, because they only sold directly to friends, people they know. But then that person changed their mind and sold it to someone else who unfortunately is a broker. And that's actually not what Genesis wanted. They didn't want a public auction. They want a big whole thing. And that's what he's doing. So, you know, I mean, I bought a lot of stuff and I've sold off a few things that I'm not going to keep. Most of it I'm going to keep. The keyboards I'm keeping, you know, Tony's keyboards, but like a few studio pieces, I was like, well, let me try that out and see if I like it or whatever. But the thing is to be respectful and not like, you know, so overtly, you know, it's, I mean, that console, for instance, is worth like 5 times less than they're selling it, or even less. And it's just jacked up, and then looks like, you know, they didn't want it to look tacky like that. You know, some artists have like sold, you know, stuff publicly themselves, auction things off for like a large amount of money, but they didn't feel they needed or wanted to do that. So that's why they did the private sale. So anyway.
Well, keep me posted. Keep me posted. One day you're gonna get rid of some of the. We'll talk offline when I see you in Florida. I'm interested in some of the.
It's still not cheap, even if you
I
just
know. Yeah.
Actual value. You know, the equipment's not cheap, but yeah, I mean, this was out of hand. But yeah, there's a few things. But yeah, what else?
Do you one day do you look back in your life and you're driving your car, or you see a song on the radio, say, man, you know, my stuff is there, or it's like a dreaming, it's like being in a dream. That what you look back in your life, say, man, I met that guy, this particular band is using my stuff or my sampling, or like, do you think about that?
Sort of. Yeah, I mean, I think that you got to be careful, in my opinion, with pride.
Yeah.
Because pride can be, there's a fine line between something beautiful and something obnoxious. You know, you don't want to be too proud of yourself, or take yourself too seriously, or have too much self-importance. And yet at the same time, you don't want to be underconfident or not appreciate what you've done and not feel important. So I feel a good balance. I feel right in the middle. I feel like kind of like I've done some cool things that I'm proud of. I think, you know, one of the things that, because it's like, you have to be careful, in my opinion, to like appreciate success from an angle that is healthy. Of course, I could say this because I'm a late bloomer. I don't know if 20-year-old me would be able to, you know, these guys who, men and women, kids who like, you know, become hugely successful at a young age and have such a mature attitude about it as I can in my 50s. But, and I wouldn't say that I'm hugely successful either, but either way, it's like, it doesn't matter. I am as successful as I need to be because I feel like I've created things, and that means something to people. And so when you're in that position where you have fans and you have people telling you things, or you have reviews, but especially when you have people like directly telling you things, and there's a difference between people saying you're amazing, you're great, you're a keyboard god, or whatever, prog god, any of these things, and then you see other people who are really famous and they get all that, and then it's like noise to them. They don't even it makes them uncomfortable, right? And you're thinking like, how can you be so uncomfortable when people are giving you such compliments? And I get it now. I understand this, because I don't need that. I don't need to be built up to be something better than other people. That's not why I do it. But when someone tells me, I drove to work today and there was traffic, but I listened to your album and it just made it wonderful. Or, you know, all sorts of different things like, you know, I listened to music and I cried, or I was singing along and I'm just loving it. And I'm like, then I feel good. Then I feel like, okay, I've done something for other people, that I've given something back that I've gotten myself. I've been there. I've been in traffic. I've been, you know, walking and just, you know, I've cried to Supper's Ready, turned it up real loud, and just be like, now I'm back again. Like, oh my God, life is good. You know, and so when someone says that to me, that means way more than I'm great or I'm this. It's almost like, you know, because the other thing, actually, Francis Dunnery taught me this. He said, don't ever believe what they say, because if they say you're great, the same people could say you suck. And you know what I mean? Like the same people turn on you, go, this album sucks, you know, all this stuff. And so it's kind of like, look, their opinion, it's none of my business. You think I'm great? You think I suck? It's obviously nicer to hear that they think you're great, but either way. And the other thing is this, and again, I'm weird, you know, I'm more, I don't know, intellectual about this stuff, but I'm careful in the sense that I feel like as an artist, because I see it happen, you can lose it. You can lose it. Like some of my favorite artists have lost it. They can't write albums like they used to. I won't say who, but we kind of know pretty much all of them. and it's like, well, what happens? And I don't know. I can't say I know, but I think there has to be a hunger and a humility and a non-ego claiming of the art that isn't all ego. That is because when you actually create, I feel like it's sort of like you're tuning in and you're collaborating with the mysterious whatever source that gives you ideas. And you have to be like tuned in like a radio station, and that's, you know, frequency and in the zone to get it. And if you just think, oh, I'm great, anything I do is great, so here's the new one, and here's the new one, and here's the new song. It's like, were you tuning in like you did when you were hungry and you wanted to write Dark Side of the Moon or whatever it is, you know? And I don't know if people are necessarily aware of that, because some of these things are invisible. And so the invisible is sometimes hard for people to acknowledge that it exists. But I acknowledge that when I write a song, it isn't all me. It's a combination of, my influences and things I've learned from them, but also just some kind of, I don't know, tuning in thing that happens. And I'm just part of the creative process. For all I know, Kevin Gilbert's writing through me or something. I don't know. I don't believe that, but I just, I actually wrote a song about that. But like, I don't have to know. My job is to just maintain that balance of like pride and ego, confidence. So like not be underconfident, think I can't do it. I can do it. I'm confident, but not think, oh, everything I do because people, it's like, nah, like I'm just riding the wave. It's a wave on an ocean. I'm a surfer. I don't really surf. I'd be terrible as an actual surfer, but I'm riding the wave, and my job is to stay on the wave.
That's right.
And keep going.
That's right.
And they say, it's like, I'm just being true to myself, man. And I'm doing what I love, and I'm giving back to the world. I even sacrifice, let's say, I could try a little harder to be relevant or be in the, I have a lot of friends who win Grammys. It's weird. A lot of my friends from LA, they win Grammys all the time. And they look at me and they're like, maybe they think like, why aren't you trying to win a Grammy? I'm like, it'd be nice, but I don't want to have to change the beauty of the art that I love about music to do that. If they want to give me a Grammy for my art, cool. They don't, because they want to do the hip hop or something or whatever, that's fine. That's their world. I live in my own little world.
That's right. Yeah. For me, let me tell you a little bit about the, try to compare and contrasting what you're saying. Growing up in Chile, I didn't have that much money, and I told you the 3 records that I have. I think it was a Gianluca Ponti one, or one from Genesis, one from Pan Metheny.
Which Jean-Luc Ponty album?
I have all his stuff. I could have been Aurora or Enigmatic Ocean or Cosmic Messenger. I don't. So I never thought at the time that one day I will be talking to this guy, or Tangerine Dream. Tangerine Dream, I have interviewed like 10 different members. Gianluca Ponti, I talked to 2.5 hours with him, and he invited me to Paris, and we talked for was like a year and a half interview. With Pan Metheny, I have interviewed some members. I have not interviewed him, but I have talked to him many times. That it's unbelievable. They having something, and then 30 years later, talking to a person via Zoom, via the internet, somebody that you admire when you were 14 years old. I don't know how to pray. And number two, the reason with the interviews, I have done, I don't know, 250 interviews or so. I have talked to, a lot of famous people, and it's not an ego thing. Let's say Robert Fripp give me an interview, right? And I end up talking to him, right? Because I love King Crimson. Yeah, 1% is an ego thing because he doesn't give too many interviews. He's a little bit of a complicated person. I will feel great, 1%. But the other 99% is I will upload the interview to the channel, and 10,000 folks all over the world at 3 o'clock in the morning are going to be watching the interview. And that makes me happy. If the YouTube channel, ever turn a profit, whether it's $1 or $1 million, whatever, every single cent will be donated to St. Jude's Hospitals, a local charity. I'm not doing the money. Because I love music. And all of a sudden, be able to talk to great musicians yourself, and two, I'm creating like a music legacy for the generation. I'm older than you, and going to pass away one day, and all the things are going to be there for future generations. So
I think great. I love. In fact, it's one of the reasons why I'm so appreciative, and I love blogs and interviews and vlogs and all that stuff. People that are passionate, that do it a lot of times these days independently, not necessarily for the money or just for enough to be able to support itself, or even if it is for the money, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think what's great is anything that promotes music artists, even, and obviously, newer artists need that much more help, because we don't have I would say I'm almost kind of in the newer artist category than, let's say, those guys who have been around since the 70s. In the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s, the music industry was much different. Today, it's much harder in some ways, at least as far as, you just don't have that same kind of interest from people in the artist, and it's just a different world. But at the same time, there are newer generations. There are people who were brilliant, like, let's say, Lyle Mays, or Pat Metheny and Pat Metheny Group, or any of the guys from Pat Metheny, whoever you talk to, and of course King Crimson and Robert Fripp, and so I think like the two really valuable things that are offered in that situation are, one, just the basics, which is attention to their art for people. So it's like, it's nice for people to just get some attention, some love and attention. And then the other thing is, if if you weren't already a fan and you're like, oh yeah, Robert Fripp, let me see, you're a younger person, you don't know them, and you're like, let me see what he's weird or whatever. But the other thing is, if you do know those artists and you always wondered about something, or if you wanted to know a bit more about who they are, or what their opinions are about certain things, you have the opportunity through all of your work, interviewing 200 something people, to and the guts and determination to go after it and try to get these people.
Yeah.
All it takes is like literally like just being persistent and just being, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, as they say, and so you don't get if you don't ask. And
That's right, yeah. I think in a way you earn it. You became a great musician on your own without being the son of or mother of. Or I every interview I have done, I earn it. I remember very clearly when I did my first interview with Steve Hackett, and I say, Steve, what I want to do, this going to be my first interview. I want to create radios that are always free and pay music right to the organization. I'm broadcasting at the best quality I can offer to 24 hours a day because I want to promote music. The same, I want to create like a YouTube channel where I interview folks like yourself for future generation. I'm not here for the money, and Steve Hackett, okay, let's do it. And then like 2 interviews after that, I got lucky. I ended up interviewing Anthony Phillip, who doesn't give any interview to anybody. I got lucky. And one thing led to another. Some people helped me out, and probably the first 20 were harder, the next 20 were easier, and so forth. But still, there are musicians that, like Robert Fripp turned me down twice, and I will go after him in 6 months from now. I'm friend with his right-hand man, and I interview him, Singleton, David Singleton. I will ask another time again. I got to know Nick Davis too. I interview him, and little by little, I have a strategy, and I have earned this stuff. If I have told you like a year ago, you would say, who is this guy? But now, little by little, I'm building more confident with the questions I asked. At the beginning, I didn't know what to ask, where people will understand the way you speak English or not. And I earned it, and I was there like for everybody. I mean, as I say before, even if the channel generates money, I will donate every money. I spend a lot of money in music. I mean, all the concerts I see, and I buy at least 20 to 25 records of vinyls or Blu-ray on a weekly basis. Most of the time I support different artists via Bandcamp because they make 90 cents on the dollar. And I'm a Patreon to several artists that are giving them whatever $5 a month or $10 a month, whatever. Because a lot of folks they don't make it. I mean,
you're my Patreon, aren't you?
Of course I am.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And I saw the 2 interviews that you did with Nick Davis, Nick is a very nice guy too, man.
Yeah.
It's a very, very hard guy. Out of everybody I have interviewed, Steve Hackett is amazing. He's a very nice guy. I mean, suppose that you didn't know he was a member of Genesis, and he have done all these great albums on his own, and so touring all over the world. He's unbelievable. His birthday was this week. He's like 72 now, and the guy is at his prime, and he's so humble. If you saw the guy walking down the street, you wouldn't need to ask him, hey, can you sign my stuff? He wouldn't even tell you who he is, unbelievable. But on the other hand, there are people that are, terrible human beings, so there's. Yeah. Dave, we hit the 2-hour mark. Would you continue? Would like to continue, or we want to do a part 2 during the weekend? What do you prefer?
We can continue.
Okay. Fine. You have your water, you have your coffee, everything?
Well, you know what? Let's take one break. I'm going to get some more water. That's okay.
Me too. Same. Okay. All right. Looking back at your life, what bands and musicians have been your strongest influences over the year, you think?
Well, Genesis, yes. Pink Floyd, Tears for Fears, Beatles, Steely Dan, The Police. Did I say Pink Floyd? Pat Metheny, also actually, and also classical like Dvorak and Tchaikovsky, Debussy, Ravel.
Rachmaninoff and Mozart, but and all, you know, jazz as well. Like besides Matheny, I always loved Jan Hammer and Jeff Beck and Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock and Weather Report, and so many diverse different styles of music, film scores, and yeah. So and I love Tangerine Dream and all those. I love Sigur Rós. That band is great, rock band, and Radiohead and Coldplay, early Coldplay. I just did an interview talking about Coldplay, and I was explaining how like I really love the first 3 albums. The 4th album's pretty good, and then I kind of just they lost. Yeah. I think that's great. And I love the Smile, the new Radiohead concoction. I'm going to see them live. I really like that album. Yeah. So those are some of my Supertramp. I love them.
Yeah. The live show for Coldplay, they're unbelievable, man. Well, I know you mentioned that you like the early stuff, but it's unbelievable. It's I don't know, for me, every concert that I go and see, it's like I get into a zone, and the music, I drink a beer or two, dancing, the energy of the crowd. I know the songs are different. They do, some are, it's not a record, right? So it's an instrumental version that longer, or they end up going one song and go to the other, or the medley that they do is I don't know, it's unbelievable, man.